Who counseled this against Tyre, the bestower of crowns? Her merchants were princes. Her traders were the honored of the earth. Hello, everybody. This is Gilgamesh. And today we are looking at Isaiah chapter 23, and it is the last chapter of this section of Isaiah known as the Oracles About the Nations. We've been on this section for quite a while now, and we're now finally coming to the end. These are a set of prophecies or oracles that all involve the word Massa, or most all of them involve the word Massa, which is a burden that is to be carried. Although one of them was specifically about Jerusalem, most of them have been about the surrounding nations around Israel. And today we're going to be looking at the kingdom of Tyre, which is actually more the city of Tyre, but it was also known as Phoenicia and in modern times as Lebanon. And so as we look at this famous city along with its sister city Sidon, who were these Phoenicians? Who were these people that lived to the north of the kingdom of Israel? Well, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here is drawn from Biblical Archaeology Review from a publication in 2017 by Ephraim Stern, who did a great article on the Phoenicians there. He points out that the Phoenicians are the nearest people to the ancient Israelites in every respect. They spoke the same language and wrote in the same script. Even their religion was very similar, at least during the first temple period. The Phoenicians and the Israelites built Jerusalem together, as well as several other cities, and they went on joint trading expeditions. That the royal houses of Phoenicia and Israel and Judah were all related by marriage. The clearest sign of the close relationship between these peoples would have been the fact that they never went to war against each other, in contrast to pretty much everyone else Israel ever met. This is the Phoenician temple at Amrit, located in Syria's Mediterranean coast. It is probably dedicated to the Phoenician god Melkart, and he would be the primary god of Tyre. And it was built in between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE, so a little after Isaiah's time, century or two later. It represents the time that the area was under Persian control. The Phoenicians were actually Canaanites. They were the late Canaanites of the first millennium BCE, from the Iron Age through the Roman period. They were descendants of the Canaanites of the second millennium BCE, from the Middle Bronze Age through the Late Bronze Age, who during that time of the second millennium BCE, they controlled everything in Palestine, Transjordan, and Syria, from Ugarit all the way down to the Egyptian border. And they had an incredible culture. But around 1200 BCE, something very important happened. It's sometimes referred to as the Bronze Age collapse. Around 1200 BCE, they were forced out of these countries by groups moving in, which included the Arameans, who would be the Syrians, the Neo-Hittites from the north, and of course the Israelites, who were coming into the land at this time, and the Sea Peoples, who had just arrived and would become known as the Philistines down in the south. But also the Ammonites, the Moabites, and the Edomites in the east would also push in and take over what was previously Canaanite territory. So between around 1200 and 1050 BCE, so from around the time that the Israelites started coming into the Promised Land until around the time of the United Kingdom, they lost control of this whole area, and they were pushed into a narrow coastal strip up by where Lebanon is now. And they had 5 main cities over there. The 2 biggest ones were Sidon and Tyre. And so just like the Philistines controlled the coastline in the southern part of where modern Israel is, down in the Gaza Strip, these folks controlled the northern part of the coastline up where the cities of Akko and Haifa and that area in northern Israel is today. So they were a sea people, and they were known particularly for their trading. This is a picture of Tel Dor. It is a major Mediterranean port on the Carmel coast, and It was built during the Iron Age, and it actually was the home to several different cultures, including the Phoenicians, before eventually falling under the Assyrians. From around the end of the 11th century BCE forward, the Phoenicians began to expand again from this homeland that they had formed on the Mediterranean coast, and they started heading west. The first thing that they ran into was Cyprus, a place that gets its name because of the presence of copper there. That became a very important part of their culture. And then they proceeded to go further west, wound up in the coasts of Sicily, they wound up in Sardinia, they wound up in Malta, and then even into southern Spain and northern Africa, where they settled cities like Carthage. These Western settlers soon established a huge commercial empire that lasted about a millennium. So, unfortunately, though, they did not leave us a rich history of written records. We have a few references to the Phoenicians in the Hebrew Bible, and we have a few ancient royal inscriptions that are primarily by the Assyrian kings. But most of what we know about the Phoenicians actually comes from the Greeks, and they didn't like them very much. So the information we have is probably very biased. The Phoenicians themselves, they left some writing behind, but it's mostly dedicatory inscriptions and has very little of historical value in it. Now, the Assyrians had a very distinct architecture, and it was imitated by all the peoples throughout the whole Palestine area. The Israelites, the Judahites, the Philistines, all these people that were east of the Jordan imitated this particular architectural style. They changed certain parts of it that is distinct to each of these other cultures. But one of the things that you'll see here is that there is this intermixing of rectangular ashlars, and on either side of it here you have sections of fieldstones. This is distinct Phoenician architecture, and we find that all the cultures of this area would adopt this same style, right up until the Assyrians came in and destroyed everything. That would be right here in our time of Isaiah, sometime towards the end of the 8th century BCE. We notice a distinct end to the style of architecture, particularly when the Assyrians came in and destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel in around 722. This is a capital that was Phoenician capital. You can see that they would influence Greek culture in the way that some of their architecture was done. This comes from Mount Gerizim. It actually moved around a fair bit. We think that it actually started from Shechem nearby, and that after the Assyrians destroyed a temple over there, it moved on. This is a throne of Ashtarte, and you'll notice here the winged sphinxes that are on either side of the throne, the lions that are in front of it. This type of iconography was incredibly popular through the region, probably is reflected in the Israelite use of cherubim, which were probably similar to this, probably sphinx-like creatures, not like the Renaissance angels as they're often portrayed to be. But yes, this iconography was popular through the region, and the Phoenicians were the source of a lot of that. This is possibly a fertility goddess. We're not quite sure. This is a female figure that is feeding a child, breastfeeding a child. And this was a popular motif in a lot of the Phoenician artwork. These here, I believe the technical term for them is horsey figures, and they're little men riding the horses. Battle was, of course, a very important part, and this represented their prowess with cavalry troops. Really important, actually, that people had started to ride horses at this point. Wasn't always the case. A lot of the early warfare would involve chariots where the horses pulled carts. Actually getting up on the horse was a bit of a innovation, mostly because nobody had invented pants. It was actually part of what caused that to happen, was you needed something better to ride a horse with. But yeah, these horses and riders were a part of the later type of warfare that we see in the area and represented here by these Phoenician figures. This is a little more disturbing. This is called a Tophet. It is a Phoenician burial ground. And why this is disturbing is, well, the Phoenicians primarily cremated their dead, and they would put the ashes into an urn that they would then make these stone markers here as to what god the ashes were dedicated to. And there seems to be a disproportionate number of children involved in this. We don't know why that is, Children did die quite a lot in the ancient world, and so that may be all it is. But of course, the rumors from their surrounding cultures is that this may have been a intense cult of child sacrifice. And at least it was perceived by other cultures around them that they were doing something pretty awful. But their habit of cremating the dead was actually quite unique and is a distinct marker of the Phoenicians in general. And they seem to have done this throughout their entire exploration of the West. This is actually from Carthage. Above all, they were master craftsmen. This is a set of ram's-headed winged sphinxes that are carved in ivory. It was discovered at the Neo-Assyrian palace at Arslan-Tash in northern Syria. It dates from 9th to 8th centuries BCE, so right around the time of Isaiah, maybe just a touch before. This is the kind of artwork they were capable of, and you can see it is remarkably beautiful. Even by our modern standards, there's incredible workmanship that has gone into this. They also were famous for their cosmetics and their jewelry, which were valued trade goods. This would be from a seashell here, a carved seashell that a woman would use for mixing some of her makeup up that she would be using and trading from a lot of these distant lands. This was one of the trade goods they would have here. You can see a carved woman's head on the shell. Here's another type of cosmetic device here. You'd put crushed powder into the bowl and use it again for painting your face or other types of cosmetic uses. My limited understanding of how makeup works. But yes, they would use these very finely carved devices here. And this would be something that a rich noble woman would have in her possession. Phoenicia was eventually, of course, conquered by the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, then the Persians, then the Greeks. So they had a bad time of it. And that's a little bit of what we're going to see reflected here in this prophecy today, is that they had a bad time of it. But that is only their presence on the coast there in the land of Israel, where modern Lebanon is. They actually had a much better run further west. They would actually enjoy autonomy clear up to the 2nd century BCE, and one of them would even march elephants right up to the gates of Rome. Yes, Hannibal was a Canaanite. The Punics were the Phoenicians. That was their settlements that they made out west. They were from the Phoenicians directly. The Phoenician commercial empire would be destroyed by the Romans in the Punic Wars. That would be around 146 BCE. And that ended a commerce empire that lasted a full millennium. So they were a remarkable, great people. Even though they didn't leave behind the most extensive written records, they left behind an incredible archaeology that shows how advanced and how cultured their civilization was. But it was built primarily on trade. It was not that they had great thinkers and writers. They were very much interested in trade, and that tells us a bit about them. They had a relationship with the Israelites that was distinct from all the others. When Solomon goes to build his temple, he gathers in the King Hiram of Tyre to come help him. So he brings the Phoenicians in to help build his temple. And so there was this very distinct relationship with the Phoenicians throughout the Hebrew Bible. They never seemed to go to war with each other. And even like when the prophet Elijah is looking for a place to find refuge, he goes to the Phoenicians and stays with them for a little while. So now we come to the text of Isaiah, having that little bit of background as to who we're talking about here. We start here in chapter 23, verse 1, the oracle, the Massah, concerning Tyre. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for Tyre is laid waste. In the lexicon, it tells us that goods were exported from Tarshish, including silver, mentioned in Jeremiah 10:9, iron, tin, and lead, mentioned in Ezekiel 27:12, and these all point to Spain, with its rich mineral resources. Tarshish could be a town, the territory of which is in the region of the mouth of Guadalquivir. With some variation, this is probably the most widely accepted view today. A precise location of Tarshish as a place in the marshes of Guadalquivir, perhaps near Astaregia or Huelva, is as yet without any archaeological foundation. So that's what the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament tells us about it. But this appears to be in Spain, a very far away place. And that may have been how this term was generally thought of. When we say ships of Tarshish, we're talking about the biggest trading ships there were. It might have even been a class of trading ship, but these were ships that could go well beyond anything anyone could imagine in distance, all the way across the Mediterranean Sea to the ends of the earth out there in this place called Tarshish, which was just unimaginably far away. This is saying you magnificent ships that can cross the sea here wail because your home city of Tyre has been destroyed. It is laid waste. Now, the last line of this verse, without house or harbor, is one translation. It's actually not very clear what it is. These two words in Hebrew that make up this last line are very problematic. I'm not sure how the English Standard Version came up with harbor here, which is where that little fragment of translation comes from. The word actually means entrance. And so I guess they were thinking the entrance to the city would be the harbor. I guess that's where they went with that. There's also no conjunction. It literally says, without house, entrance. That's the most literal of what the Hebrew says, but it doesn't make a ton of sense. Now, in the translation I was showing you here, which is from the English Standard Version, they actually have the word Tyre twice, but the Hebrew word sor, which is translated as Tyre, only shows up once in the verse. So I have a few quibbles with this translation, really. And so my own translation of this, what I would actually do is I would change around how some of the lines and sentences actually flow together on this, and I think it makes a bit more sense. My rendering of this would be, wail, O ships of Tarshish, for their house is destroyed. Returning from the land of Kittim, it is revealed to them. So that takes in the next two lines here as well. But I think that the destroyed here goes with the word house, and the entrance or harbor word here goes with the land of Kittim and should probably be read as returning. And that's where I'm getting my translation from there. So the idea here is, though, these long distance trading ships are coming home to Tyre to find it destroyed, and they are coming back from the land of Kittim. And that's when they see that everything is laid waste. Now, of course, where is Kittim? We're not entirely sure, but a good guess is that Kittim is Cyprus. They were great seafaring merchants, and that's constantly brought forward in this poem. But the idea here is that they are coming back on some type of a Mediterranean voyage to discover that the city has been devastated. So it's saying these ships of Tarshish are coming back. They're coming back from the land of Kittim, and they see that everything is laid waste. And so we're seeing this from the perspective of the sailors coming home to find that the home has been ransacked. Others place Kittim over as part of the Greek archipelago. Could be. But like Tarshish, this is just a far off land where the sailors go. I don't know that Isaiah or his audience would have had a whole lot of understanding of any of these places. They were not sailors, and to their view, going off into the sea to these far off places was an unthinkable thing. They're all just beyond the scope of imagination, even. They're just far off places that probably all blended together in their mind as to where they're at. They couldn't themselves possibly have hopped on a ship and found these places. That was part of what made the Phoenicians special, was that they could navigate this landscape where the rest of the world really didn't understand where these destinations were. So all of these, to Isaiah and his listeners, probably just represented things beyond the horizon that could only be told of in legendary terms. So we continue here in verse 2. Be still, O inhabitants of the coast, the merchants of Sidon, who crossed the sea, have filled you. We have here the sister city of Sidon being mentioned, and we're told to be still, inhabitants of the coasts. Well, Sidon is a town whose name means fishing, and it is located on the Mediterranean coast about 25 miles north of Tyre. This phrase, be still, some interpreters would like to argue that the meaning of the verb is to moan or howl, because they want to have it be like wailing that is mentioned in the first line of the poem, that should be like that we're not telling somebody to be quiet, but to mourn or wail. There is an Akkadian cognate word which might lend some weight to this. But The word here that's used, domu, everywhere else means to be still or to be silent. And perhaps Isaiah is imagining two antithetical responses to disaster, some wailing and some dumbfounded in silence. That may be what we're seeing here. There is another possible meaning of this word, which is to be destroyed. And perhaps that is what it's saying here, that, O inhabitants of the coast are destroyed, the merchants of Sidon. Now, the word for merchants, it's actually singular in the Masoretic text, but the Septuagint, the Targum, and the Vulgate all suggest that it should be plural, so it probably should be plural here. So likely we have a small copyist error with that. It also says, who crosses the sea have filled you, which doesn't make a great amount of sense. Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls, where it has who crosses the sea, which is a masculine singular participle, the Dead Sea Scrolls actually have it as a third masculine plural perfect. They cross the sea. That changes things a bit. So be still or wail. O inhabitants of the coast, the merchants of Sidon crossed the sea. Okay, that makes a little bit different there. What is about this filled you, though? Well, the word here that is translated as have filled you, we think that that might be wrong too. Instead of miluk, they filled you, we change it to malakaik, your agents. A malak is a messenger or an agent. It's also the word for an angel, but here it's probably a messenger. So malakaik would be your messengers, your agents. And that might be the correct word here rather than miluk, which would be they filled you, which doesn't seem to make any sense. So if we bring in that, we have be still, inhabitants of the coast, merchants of Sidon, your messengers cross the sea. So this again alludes to the idea that they are a trading mercantile nation that has mastered seafaring. And that fits. And it fits better than they have filled you. So I think that is probably the best translation we can offer there. But we also have the first part of the next line, which is and on many waters. I think that that first little bit of the next verse actually belongs with this verse. And if we do it that way, we then come and say, be still, inhabitants of the coast. Merchants of Sidon cross the sea. His messengers are in many waters. Now we have a very nicely formed parallelistic structure, which sounds a lot more like good Hebrew. So we are telling the inhabitants of the coastland here to mourn in some way, and that their merchants cross the sea and their messengers are on many waters. It makes a lot more sense. And so I think the opening part of verse 3 actually belongs in this verse instead. So going from there, seed of Shihor was his harvest. The Nile, her ingathering. She shall be a merchant of the nations. Also might be read as you shall be a merchant of the nations. The she and the you form are identical in Hebrew. Well, Shihor, what is that? Both Shihor and Nile, both names actually are probably the same river. It's the Nile. It's possible that the second line was actually a gloss to explain to anybody who didn't know what Shihor was, what it was. But it also could be poetic parallelism, which to me seems more likely. They're getting grain and bringing it down the Nile. So the idea here is that they're trading in crops and that they were a merchant of many nations. So they're trading all the way down into Egypt. And moving on to verse 4, it says, be ashamed, O Sidon, for the sea has spoken, the stronghold of the sea, saying, I have not been in labor pain, and I have not given birth, and I have not reared young men. I have brought up virgins. So here we have the sea is personified and is speaking. Now, it may just be a poetic personification, Or it could be that sea here should be understood as the proper name Yam. Yam was a goddess of chaos who was the sea. Most Canaanite gods had names that were the same as the things that represented them. So this may be that Yam has spoken, the stronghold of Yam saying, and it would make sense for this to be a goddess. It's talking about a female here not being, having been in labor pains, not having brought forth children. It's not entirely clear what this speech is about, but in many prophecies of destruction, young men, represented here by the word bachorim, and virgins, batulot, are often said to be killed, and they are sort of the icons of the people's pride and joy, their youth, their young people, their hope for the future, that they are brought to destruction. So what the scene might be saying is, I had no part in bringing these young men and women into the world and rearing them, and so if they perished, it's not my affair. So this might be that Yam is disavowing them, that these are not her young people that she has brought forth. Now, interestingly enough, there is no negation on the final line here. What sometimes happens in Hebrew, this isn't too unusual, is that a negation will be put on one line but not both lines. It's just understood that it works on both. So I've given a somewhat literal translation here where it says, I have not given birth, I have not reared young men, I have brought up virgins. The not on the line above it probably is intended to cover both lines. So it's probably actually saying here, I have not brought up virgins, to parallel with I have not reared young men. That's the most likely intended interpretation here. So the sea is basically saying that she has not brought forward this current generation of young people, and she is disavowing them. And perhaps the sea as a personification here is saying that she will not allow them to cross her to do the various mercantile activities that Tyre is so known for. The sea will no longer be their friend. That could also be an interpretation of this. So we have here now in verse 5, we look at other nations hearing of this destruction. When Egypt heard of it, they will be in labor pain, as when hearing about Tyre. We again have this image of labor pain, and we have it happening to Egypt, who will be in labor pain apparently when hearing about Sidon, as they were when they heard about Tyre. So both cities would be destroyed, and perhaps news of the destruction of Tyre would reach Egypt first, and then they would hear about the destruction of Sidon. Now, unfortunately, we can't match this to any historical happening we are aware of. We don't know that this has any connection to something that actually happened in history. But we are discussing here these two great cities being destroyed. And then we have verse 6 here. Cross over to Tarshish. Wail, O inhabitants of the coast. Is this your exultant city, whose origins is from days of old, whose feet carried her to settle far away? Cross over to Tarshish. This is basically saying, hop back on your boats and head off to the west in the sea to wherever this far off land of Tarshish is. Go back to this distant, remote land that is too far away to even imagine. And it asks, is this your exultant city? It seems that that's referring to Tarshish being this exultant city. And this is interesting because this is the same way that Jerusalem was discussed in the last chapter as an exultant city, meaning a prideful city that was not showing the proper respect and deference towards God that they should. And so that might be what we're saying here. And we're saying whose origin is from days of old. It's incredibly long ago that you have the origin of the city, and whose feet carried her to settle far away. I think this again is the idea that they were colonizers and that they have settled these cities far off. Again, they have Carthage out there, they have Tarshish, probably in Spain, and they have settlements in these places. And so they have gone far across the sea to settle in these places. Now, when we say days of old, I should point out that the origin of the word old is actually the same word as the word for east, because that's where the sun rises, and so that's the time of old, the beginning is the east. It is interestingly to the west, but yeah, it is days of old or days of the east. And then in verse 8, we have, who counseled this against Tyre, the bestower of crowns? Her merchants were princes, her traders were the honored of the earth. The bestower of crowns. The Hebrew here is ma'atira. It's not terribly clear if this is one who bestows crowns or one who wears crowns. And you'll see translations going either way. But either Tyre was a kingmaker, they were the power behind the throne of other nations, or they themselves were the wearers of the crown, being able to conquer the sea and stretch out across the earth. We're not sure what is intended by this word. The word here for traders, though, is very interesting because it is actually a homonym with the word Canaanite. Now, this may be a play on words here. It actually says her Canaanites were the honored of the earth, but the word here, Canaan, means one who trades. And so when we say her traders were the honored of the earth, this is a reference to her being Canaan. And so we ask the question, who counseled this? So it's time to answer that question. We have verse 9. The Lord of hosts has counseled it. So there's our answer. Who counseled that this should be destroyed? It was the Lord of hosts. That even though they were the bestowers of crowns and her merchants were like royalty themselves, princes and honored of the earth, the Lord of hosts has counseled it to defile the pride, all glory to dishonor, all the honored of the earth. Cross over your land like the Nile, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no restraint anymore. So the Lord is going to bring down the pride and the glory of Tarshish here, all the honored of the earth. This is part of the reversal of everything that Isaiah often talks about, that these that are prideful and powerful will be laid low. Dead Sea Scrolls actually move the position of one of the words all to before the word pride. It looks like it got transposed at some time, so it probably should say to defile all the pride, glory to dishonor. That's probably the correct translation there, but it looks like some words got a little bit jumbled in the order. Also, the word for glory or splendor here actually might mean gazelles. And this is actually a thing that we see a few times, especially in Isaiah, where leaders of other nations are often represented by animals. And so this word here that is glory or splendor actually can mean gazelle. And this might be a idiomatic phrase to refer to the leaders of a nation. We've seen that a few times in Isaiah. All the honored of the earth mirrors her traders were the honored of the earth from the last verse. So this seems again to be that reference to the word Canaan from the last verse. But then this final pass through your land like the Nile, this might just mean that like the Nile runs through Egypt, Tyre is enjoined to pass through all of her land. But the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint both support the idea that a Dalet and a Resh, the D and the R in Hebrew, got mixed up because they look a lot alike. And based on the older reading of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the translation of the Septuagint, this might supposed to mean, instead of cross through, it might mean serve your land. That would make some sense here. Serve your land like the Nile. Then we have the final enigmatic line here. There is no restraint anymore. The word for restraint, we're not really sure what it's about. It is proposed that two letters were transposed, and that would make the word harbor, which is not a very common word. I would also note that it is not at all the same word that was translated as harbor by the English Standard Version back in the beginning of this chapter. So it's not that word at all. But this, if we were to transpose two letters in this, would mean the word harbor. Restraint is a guess based on how the word is actually written, but the word as it's written is kind of just nothing. Nobody knows what it would mean. Harbor seems like it would make more sense here. And so I think this is telling the seafarers to travel through the land since their harbor has been destroyed. So cross over the land like the Nile, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no harbor anymore. So maybe it's saying that they're going to need to make inland travels because their seafaring is no longer possible. The harbor has been destroyed. That could be what we're saying here. Moving forward to verse 11. He has stretched out his hand over the sea. He has shaken the kingdoms. The Lord has given command concerning Canaan to destroy its strongholds. So again, we have the reference to Canaan here, that we are reminding that this is the descendants of the Canaanites here, and the Lord has decided that her strongholds will be destroyed in this action. And he has stretched out his hand over the sea. Again, this might be the idea of the sea being the goddess Yam, which does go back to several creation ideas of the Lord controlling chaos. But he has stretched out his hand over the sea also implies that their seafaring days are going to be disrupted. And so there is judgment against three things in this verse: the sea or Yam, kingdoms, and Canaan. Now, Canaan, we already mentioned, might mean traders. And so this might be saying that the Lord has given command concerning traders to destroy its strongholds. Or it might mean the political entity of the Canaanite people, or in this case, it might be both. While the word for strongholds is also not at all certain in this, it looks like the same word that we had back when we said the strongholds of the sea back in verse 4, but here it has an extra letter in it, a yod, and we aren't sure why. But it would make sense that if we're making judgment against Yam and we mention the stronghold of Yam, that mentioning that the stronghold will be destroyed does make it fit and flow nicely with the previous verse. Verse 12, and he said, you will not again exult, raped virgin, daughter of Sidon, Kittim, arise, cross over also there. There shall be no rest for you. Well, the phrase here, raped virgin, probably got some attention there. Yes, this word here can mean oppressed, but it also very clearly means violated or raped. And given the context here of pairing it with virgin, it does seem to indicate someone who has been violated. That is the imagery here. It is meant to be powerful imagery because we are talking about a brutal destruction of a people. And these cities were often referred to in terms of young women to get the emotional response out of them, that this daughter of Sidon has been violated. And it says to cross over to Kittim. We had told them previously to cross over to Tarshish. Now we're saying to go over to Kittim, that even this faraway place, you will not find rest there. And so their vast kingdom, stretching across the sea, will have nowhere that they can escape this judgment and destruction. So verse 13, behold the land of the Chaldeans. This is a people that was not. Assyria founded her for demons. They erected their siege towers. They stripped her palaces bare. They made her a ruin. Well, interestingly, the land of the Chaldeans. We switched the viewpoint to Mesopotamia. We're not entirely sure why. The Chaldeans are a people that was not, or a people that maybe are no more. They will show what the fate of the Phoenicians will be, but we're not sure what that means because the Chaldeans are the Babylonians, and Assyria didn't lay waste to Babylon that we know of. In fact, it would be the other way around. Babylon's going to lay waste to Assyria. Hard to say what's going on with this one. But we do have the idea here that destroyed cities are inhabited by demons and monsters. So Assyria founded her for demons meant that Assyria took the city, destroyed it such that demons would inhabit it. That's what happens to a city that's ruined and laid waste, is when you leave it there on its own, the demons move in and dance in her empty palaces. That's what it's saying here. So Look at the land of the Chaldeans, this people that was not, meaning probably that they were destroyed. Assyria founded her for demons. They erected their siege towers, probably an idea of how they laid siege to the city. They stripped her palaces bare. They made her a ruin. So the land of the Chaldeans was destroyed by the Assyrians, except historically, we don't know of any time that this actually happened. So hard to say what this is talking about. Then we return here, verse 14. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for your stronghold is laid waste. So 14 here recaps the very close wording that we had in verse 1. It may be that this originally was the end of the prophecy, and that what follows is a bit of a short commentary or perhaps a related prophecy. Interestingly, this is our third usage of that word stronghold. Here it is replacing the name of the city, Tyre. So your stronghold is laid waste rather than Tyre is laid waste. But we have then this sort of inclusion envelope style that we often have with prophecies where the ending matches the beginning. And so this is sort of like a final coda on the prophecy. Now, what follows is related, it seems. Definitely, we're still talking about Tyre, but this may have been a separate prophecy that, as the editors were putting together the book of Isaiah, they decided, well, let's put the two different prophecies about Phoenicia together here. What follows may be actually a separate prophecy. And it shall come to pass in that day. Again, a narrative opening here, possibly indicating that we are now looking at a different section here. We're looking into the future. It shall come to pass in that day. And Tyre will be forgotten 70 years, like the days of one king. Now, a lot has been said about this, the idea that Tyre is going to be forgotten for 70 years. One of the things that was noted here and became a little bit of an internet meme is that when Queen Elizabeth died, this verse was quoted frequently, pointing out that no monarch has ruled for more than 70 years. Now, I doubt that has any connection to this verse, but it's also not true. Elizabeth was the second longest reigning modern monarch. Louis XIV reigned for 72 years. Ramesses II, one of my favorites, only made it for 66 years, so he stayed within the 70. But Pepi II of the Egyptian 6th dynasty, back in 2274 BCE, made it for an amazing 94 years that he reigned. Anyway, I don't think that has any relevance to this, but fun little fact. Anyway, Tyre will be forgotten for 70 years, like the days of one king. At the end of 70 years, it will happen to Tyre as in the song of the prostitute. So now we have this song that a prostitute sings, and that's what we're doing here. So this is a rare moment when the prophet seems to incorporate a piece of pop culture of his times into the text. It's hard to recover what the full meaning of the song was, but he seems to be quoting what must have been some sort of a popular song in his time about a prostitute. Now, prostitution and the Hebrew Bible have an interesting relationship. It doesn't seem like it was looked on favorably, but it also doesn't seem like it was in any kind of denial that it was a regular occurrence either. We've got interesting stories with prostitutes involving the tribal founder Judah. We've got them involving Samson. There's the spies that go to Jericho, they also wind up getting involved with a prostitute. There's interesting things in the Hebrew Bible involving this. But yeah, we're going to quote here a song that is sung by the prostitute. Take a harp, go about the city, forgotten prostitute. Play your instrument well, sing many songs that you may be remembered. This has to do with Tyre being forgotten. Tyre is the old prostitute that is going around the city with her harp, her kinnor, and she is playing this and singing songs so that people will remember her. Tyre, the people of Judah probably viewed them, seafaring and trading people, as being maybe a bit unseemly. That the idea of going out to these far off places was just not all that great to them. They were an agricultural people. They were very settled in their hill country. And the idea of living on the seashore and going off into the crazy sea in ships To them, this might have seemed a bit like prostitution, and that she was going out and having interactions with all these far off places. To them, that might have seemed a bit too exotic, a bit too risque. And so, yes, as Tyre is forgotten, she is like the aging prostitute who has lost her clientele. And so she takes her kinnor, her harp, and she goes about the city and sings her songs and plays her harp. The imagery here is clearly plaintive. There is a little question as to whether that final verb should be active or passive. I have it translated here that you may be remembered. It's also that's a passive translation. The other translation that is popular is that you may remember. So it's like the prostitute herself is forgetting, and playing the songs reminds her of a previous time. And either one is an acceptable translation here. But yes, it's interesting imagery, and we're going to continue the imagery. So verse 17, and it shall come to pass. We have our narrative phrase there again that we're talking about in the future here, but this is clearly connected to the last one because we have at the end of 70 years. The Lord will visit Tyre. Now, this word for visit also can mean to call to mind, thus remember. So this is kind of like the opposite of Tyre not being remembered. The Lord will visit Tyre, and she will return to her prostitution pay. And she will prostitute herself with all the kingdoms of the land on the face of the earth. Okay, her prostitution pay. A lot of people would like to make other translations for what this word is, but yeah, its meaning is rather unambiguous in the Hebrew. Etnan is payment received by a prostitute for her sexual services. Basically, the Lord is going to restore Tyre so that she can be the young prostitute again, and she'll go right back to having an active and interested clientele. Yeah, she will return to making money as a prostitute with all the kingdoms of the land on the face of the earth. So it's hard to say what Isaiah is doing here. I think he's having a bit of fun. It probably says a little bit about how they viewed mercantile economy and capitalism in general as not very positive, and thus they're referring to it as being similar to prostitution. It's not honest work like, agriculture. So he's basically saying here, don't worry, after 70 years, Tyre will be restored and she'll be right back to her old ways of sending these ships out all over the place, just like a prostitute. I think he's having a bit of fun here with this. I don't think this is necessarily meant to be super serious, because I don't think that he was that positive towards prostitutes, but it's hard to say. What the meaning here is clear, though, that like a forgotten prostitute who had lost her clientele, she's going to go about singing because nobody is buying her services anymore. But after 70 years, she'll be restored, and she'll have business will be booming across all the face of the earth. Verse 18, and it shall come to pass, another use of that phrase, her merchandise and her prostitute pay will be consecrated to the Lord. It will not be stored, it will not be hoarded, for to those who dwell before the Lord shall be her merchandise to eat to satisfaction and for a set apart covering. How this is going to happen is not explained, but somehow the prosperous Tyre will funnel all of her money from her prostitution into Judah, establishing a life of luxury for the people who are dwelling in the Lord's presence, basically the temple workers, which is in the Jerusalem temple. It's a bit puzzling that Tyre is going to support the temple with prostitute wages, but that is what it says. It seems to be both condemning trade and exploration, while also acknowledging that it is an important and needed part of Judah's own restoration. Now, it mentions here that, her merchandise along with her prostitute's pay, and so this is all the goods that she's getting from the commerce that she has going across the sea. They're going to come in there and they're going to be able to have all the food they need in the temple. And it's also going to be for a set apart covering. The word here, set apart, could mean ancient or it could mean magnificent. It's got a little bit of a range of meanings. It's obviously a very positive thing here. The word for covering itself is a little unclear if this is some type of clothing or if it is a physical shelter. So it might mean a covering like maybe even a blanket. But the word for covering is also used for the roof of a tent that brings shelter. Also, for the Ark of the Covenant itself had a cover using this same word. So, since we're talking about a temple structure here, I believe we're probably talking about some type of a shelter or more of a physical structure rather than a piece of clothing, although clothing was also important in the temple setting. But that's how this ends, is that Tyre will be restored. She will become a marvelous sex worker again, and that her wages will be sent to fund the work of the Lord in the temple. And that's the way we end the oracles about the nations. I hope you have enjoyed it. It's been a fun little section of Isaiah, and we'll move on to the next one next time. Thank you very much. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.